Welcome back, my friends, to another night where the city sleeps, but the stories don't. If this is your first time here, stay close. We're about to step into a place most people would rather avoid. Have you ever felt it? That sudden, icy awareness that someone is standing just behind you, even when you know you're alone? No footsteps. No shadow. Just a presence, quiet. Patient, waiting for you to turn. Most people shrug it off. But some turn around. And that's when they see her. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about Kin. A man who thought moving into a small apartment in the heart of Hong Kong would be the fresh start he needed. He didn't know, the place was already occupied. And its other resident never left. Lau Kin never thought of himself as superstitious. He grew up in a city where lights burned through the night and noise never really stopped, where the old ghost stories his grandmother used to tell felt like shadows from another time. Too far away to reach him. By the time he was in his final year at the university, Kin's life was a rotation of studio classes, late-night projects, and shared laughter with friends in the cramped dorms. The dorm rooms were stacked like boxes, walls thin enough for you to hear your neighbor's music through your pillow. Privacy was a luxury. Silence, almost impossible. So when the chance came to rent an old house, cheap, spacious, and not far from campus, he didn't think twice. It was supposed to be for him and 3 close friends. A final year treat before they all scattered after graduation. But schedules never matched. One was finishing an internship overseas. Another was caught in a family move. The last simply said he needed a few more weeks before leaving the dorm. And so, Lau Kin moved in alone. The house sat on a quiet street where the asphalt was cracked, where rainwater lingered in uneven patches long after a storm had passed. Its wooden door was heavy, the brass handle cool to the touch even on warm afternoons. Inside, the air was still, too still for a place in the middle of the city. It was 3 stories tall, with narrow staircases and a faint smell of dust and old varnish. The living room had a wide window facing a row of silent, shuttered shops. The kitchen tiles were patterned in pale green and cream, worn smooth by years of footsteps. And upstairs was where Kin chose his bedroom. 2nd floor. Large enough for a single bed, a desk, and the same chipping wardrobe that must have stood there for decades. At night, the only sound came from the old ceiling fan turning slowly, its blades groaning in a rhythm that almost felt like breathing. When Kin first brought his things in, the landlord had only said one thing before handing over the keys. Keep everything where it is. No explanation. No small talk. Just that one instruction, spoken with an unreadable expression. Kin didn't think much of it. He wasn't there to redecorate, anyway. The first 2 nights were uneventful. He set up his desk, arranged his books, and tried to enjoy the quiet. But the quiet here wasn't like the libraries. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that seemed to listen back. Sometimes, when he walked through the hallway after sunset, Kin thought he heard something light and quick above him, like a small footstep across the ceiling. But when he stopped, it stopped. Every time. He told himself it was the wooden frame of the house adjusting to the night air, or maybe a cat on the roof. He didn't notice the way the shadows seemed to stretch a little too far down the corridor. Or the faint, lingering scent, something between old fabric and rain-soaked wood, that clung to the stairwell no matter how many windows he opened. Kin had lived alone before. During summer jobs and short internships, but this was different. Here, the space didn't just surround him. It seemed to watch him. And sometimes, when he closed the bedroom door at night, he felt like it was holding its breath. Kin had first seen the listing on a faded notice board outside the campus cafe. The paper was creased, the ink slightly blurred, as if it had been left there long enough to gather the city's damp air. In bold letters at the top, 2-story house for rent. Fully furnished. Low rate. At the bottom, a number scrawled by hand, the ink pressed so hard it almost tore the paper. Most rentals near the university were cramped apartments or subdivided flats with paper-thin walls. This one promised space, actual rooms, a kitchen, even a small balcony. It felt like a chance too good to ignore. He called the number that afternoon. The voice on the other end was male, slow, deliberate. "Yes, it's still available," the man said. No enthusiasm. No attempt to persuade. Just a plain confirmation, followed by an address and the instruction. "Come before sunset." Kin arrived early. Just as the last stretch of daylight slid between the tall buildings. The house stood a short distance up a slope, tucked between two newer structures whose walls pressed in close on either side. Its paint had dulled to a grayish cream, and the iron gate squealed faintly when he pushed it open. The landlord was waiting at the door. Tall, thin, his expression unreadable. He greeted Kin with a slight nod, then stepped aside to let him in. No handshake. Inside, the air was cooler than outside, though no fan or air conditioning was running. The light from the windows caught on dust motes drifting slowly in the stillness. The furniture was simple but intact, a wooden dining table, a fabric sofa. A standing lamp whose shade had yellowed with age. Nothing was broken, nothing out of place. They walked through the rooms in silence. The landlord opened each door with the same measured movement. As if following a sequence he'd repeated many times. In the kitchen, Kin noticed the tiles, pale green and cream, worn smooth in front of the sink. As though someone had stood there for hours every day, year after year. When they reached the second floor, the landlord paused at the end of the hallway, in front of a door on the right. "This one," he said. "You'll use this room." There was no suggestion, no question. Just a statement. Kin glanced inside. It was larger than he'd expected, with a single bed pushed neatly against the wall. A small desk, and a wardrobe that seemed older than the rest of the furniture. The floorboards creaked faintly under his step, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet space. "I'll take it," Kin said. The landlord gave a slow nod, then handed him the keys. That was when he added, almost as an afterthought. "Keep everything where it is." His voice didn't rise or fall, it carried no threat. No warmth. Just an even tone that made the instruction feel heavier than it should. Kin wanted to ask why, but the man was already turning away, heading down the stairs. By nightfall, the agreement was done. A modest deposit. A rent so low it made Kin wonder how long the place had been sitting empty. The landlord locked the front door behind them, then left without looking back. As Kin stood alone on the quiet street, keys cold in his hand, he felt the faintest breath of wind slip between the buildings. It carried with it a smell he couldn't place, something like damp wood and old fabric, touched with the metallic edge of rain. He told himself it was just the scent of an old house settling into the night. But later, when he lay in the dorm bed for what he knew would be the last time, that smell still lingered in his mind. And somewhere, in the small hours before dawn, he thought he heard. Just for a moment. The faint, uneven rhythm of footsteps on wooden stairs. The first evening Lao Kin moved in. The street outside was already quiet. The air was heavy with that faint metallic scent of a day that had been cloudy but never quite rained. He carried in his bags alone. Each step echoing in the narrow hallway as though the walls were listening. His friends had promised they would join him in a couple of weeks. For now, the house was his, 3 floors. Empty and waiting. The silence inside was unlike any quiet he'd known before. It wasn't the hum of a library, or the muffled noise of the dorm when everyone was out. This quiet felt layered. Like the house had grown used to holding its breath. Kin unpacked slowly. He placed his textbooks on the desk, arranged his clothes in the old wardrobe, and set his laptop on the small table by the bed. The ceiling fan turned lazily above him, each rotation releasing a faint groan from its motor. By the time he finished, the sky outside had deepened to a muted blue, the first street lamps flickering to life in the distance. Downstairs, the living room felt larger than it had during the daytime viewing. The sofa faced a low wooden table, its surface scratched in places where something sharp had once dragged across it. The kitchen smelled faintly of old tea leaves, even though the cupboards were bare. That night, Kin cooked instant noodles, ate standing by the kitchen counter, and washed the single bowl immediately afterward. It wasn't until he turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to his room that he noticed it. A soft creak, not from the steps beneath his feet, but from somewhere above. It was light, quick. Almost like a single footstep, far away. He paused halfway up the stairs, holding still. The sound didn't repeat. He told himself it was just the wood settling. The kind of noise any old house makes when the air cools after sunset. The next morning, sunlight spilled into his room through the thin curtains. For a moment, the house felt ordinary. He made coffee, opened the front door to let in some air, and watched the empty street below. A stray cat crossed from one side to the other, its paws silent on the cracked asphalt. The days passed quietly. Kin settled into a rhythm, classes in the morning, study in the afternoon, a simple dinner at night. Sometimes he worked late at his desk. The glow of his laptop screen the only light in the room. The rest of the house would fade into shadow. The stairwell and hallways disappearing into a thick kind of darkness that made him glance over his shoulder more than once. On the third night, he noticed something odd. The air in the hallway outside his bedroom was cooler than the rest of the house. Not the kind of cool from an open window, but a damp chill that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. When he stood there too long, it felt like the temperature dropped further, just enough to raise the hairs on his arms. He brushed it off. Old houses have drafts. That's what he told himself as he closed the door and sat back at his desk. But later, as he lay in bed listening to the slow turn of the ceiling fan, he thought he heard something else. A soft, almost playful tap, from somewhere near the wardrobe. 3 taps. Then nothing. Kin didn't get up to check. He pulled the blanket over his shoulders and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally found him. The house stayed quiet after that. Almost too quiet. And in that stillness, Lao Kin began to realize. Silence can be louder than any sound. It was close to midnight when Lao Kin finally turned off the light. The day had been long, lectures, a trip to the market, and a few hours sorting through old notes in his new room. The ceiling fan spun slowly above, its rhythm steady but uneven, like a breath that sometimes caught in the throat. Kin lay under the same blanket he had used for years in the dorms. It was familiar, carrying the faint scent of detergent from his last wash. But tonight, it felt different. The air in the room was cooler than usual, the kind of damp chill that clings to skin. At first, it was just a mild itch. A scratch on his forearm, a quick rub of his calf. He thought nothing of it, maybe dust from the move, maybe dry skin. But as minutes passed, the itch returned. Not in the same place. It wandered, shoulder, ankle, the back of his neck, small. Sharp bursts that made him shift restlessly under the blanket. He sat up halfway, scratching at his arm, then pulled the blanket off completely. Maybe it was too warm. But no, the air around him was almost cold. He ran a hand across the fabric, searching for crumbs or loose threads. Nothing. A thought crossed his mind, bedbugs. But he had used this blanket for years without trouble. Still, he stood, switched on the bedside lamp, and shook it out with a few sharp snaps. Dust motes drifted lazily in the lamplight. Not an itch this time. More like the drag of something fine and sharp across his skin. Light. Deliberate. Like the tip of a fingernail tracing a line along his forearm. He froze. There was nothing there, only the faint heat of his own touch. A second line came. This time along his calf. A slow scrape, not deep enough to hurt, but enough to leave a trail of shivers in its wake. Kin sat up fully now, scanning the room in the dim light from the window. The wardrobe stood closed. The desk was as he'd left it. The door remained shut. He reached for his phone. Flicked on the flashlight, and ran the beam across the bed, the floor, the corners. Nothing. With a quiet exhale, he told himself it was in his head, just his body adjusting to a new environment. He switched off the light again and lay back down, this time pulling the blanket only to his chest. For a while, nothing happened. Sleep began to pull at him. And then, one final scrape. A silence that felt like it was waiting. The second night began like any other. Kin returned late, the air outside heavy with the faint scent of rain that never came. His body ached from a long day, lectures, errands, and a quick meal eaten on the walk home. By the time he reached the house, the street was empty. Only the weak orange glow of the street lamps kept the darkness from swallowing the road entirely. Inside, the house greeted him with the same cool stillness. He locked the front door, climbed the narrow staircase, and stepped into his room. The blanket from the night before lay folded neatly at the end of the bed. He didn't remember folding it. He told himself it didn't matter. It had been a long day. People forget small things. After a quick shower, he slid under the blanket, pulling it up to his shoulders. The ceiling fan turned above, its hum steady. For a while, the stillness almost felt normal. Then, something touched his cheek. It was subtle, just enough pressure to sink into the skin, a cold spot spreading outward like ice melting against warmth. Not the brush of fabric. Not air from the fan. A human touch. Kin's eyes snapped open. The room was dark, save for the faint gray of moonlight through the curtains. He lay still, breath shallow. Listening. A second touch came, this time on the other cheek. Not a stroke. A pinch. Small fingers, cold and firm, squeezing just enough to make him blink. The image that leapt into his mind was absurd, a child at play, tugging at someone's face. But the chill that came with the touch was real, sinking deep into his skin. Then the touches began to move. A poke at his temple. A quick brush along his jaw. Something tugged lightly at the hair above his ear, then released it. Kin jerked upright, scanning the room. No one. The air was still. He swung his legs over the bed, ready to stand, when a voice drifted through the dark. Soft. Female. Close. He's a little playful. Please, don't be angry with him. The words were calm. Almost polite, but they sank into him with a weight that froze him in place. Kin turned toward the sound. His eyes landed on the far corner of the room, empty. And then, in the mirror above his desk, he saw her. She was sitting far back in the reflection, as if the glass opened into another space. A young woman, her long black hair falling over her shoulders, a small boy perched in her lap. The boy's face was turned toward Kin, but his features were blurred, like looking through fogged glass. Kin spun around. The corner was empty. When he turned back to the mirror, they were gone. The room felt colder now, the air pressing closer. He didn't sleep right away. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wardrobe, at the door, at the mirror, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. But long after he lay down again, he could still feel it. The ghost of cold fingers against his cheek. The third night. The city outside felt different. The air was heavier, the street lamps dimmer, as if the darkness had thickened and pressed in closer to the house. Kin had stayed up late sketching for a final year project. By the time he shut his laptop, it was well past 2. He lay down, eyes heavy. The slow rhythm of the ceiling fan overhead almost lulling him to sleep. And then, 3 knocks. Soft. Evenly spaced. From the front door downstairs. Kin's eyes opened. He held still, listening. The sound came again, 3 deliberate knocks, each one sinking into the silence like a stone dropped into still water. No one visited at this hour. He thought of ignoring it. But the knocking came a 3rd time. Not louder. Not impatient. Just, there. He climbed out of bed, every floorboard groaning under his weight as he made his way down the staircase. The house seemed to grow colder with each step. At the front door, he hesitated. For a moment, he thought he saw a faint shadow shift across the narrow strip of frosted glass above the handle. He unlocked the door and opened it a fraction. A woman stood outside. Early 20s, maybe. Her skin was pale under the yellow glow of the street lamp, her black hair pulled back loosely. A few strands clinging to her cheek. She was dressed simply, dark blouse, skirt, but her eyes didn't seem to focus on him directly. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said softly. "My little brother, he's run inside. I need to bring him home." Kin blinked. "What?" The woman tilted her head slightly toward the hallway behind him. "There," she whispered. Kin turned. At the far end of the hallway, near the base of the stairs, stood a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 4 years old. But he wasn't standing still. He was bouncing, slow. Strange jumps that seemed to hang in the air too long, like gravity had loosened its hold on him. And he made no sound. No thud of small feet on the wooden floor. No breath. Kin's skin prickled. He turned back to the woman, ready to ask how the boy could have gotten in. But she was already moving forward. She didn't step past him. She didn't wait for space. She walked straight through him. It was like stepping into a pocket of winter, cold flooding his lungs, the air pressed tight against his ribs, his heart stuttering in his chest. Behind him, her voice came again, closer now. "Don't trouble him anymore. He'll leave soon." Kin turned, but the hallway was empty. No boy. No woman. The front door still hung open, a thin ribbon of night air slipping inside. He shut it quickly. Locked it, and stood there for a long time, his back against the wood, breathing hard. Upstairs, the ceiling fan turned on its own. He knew he hadn't left it running. Kin didn't sleep for the rest of that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the open sketchbook on his desk, pencil still resting where he'd dropped it hours earlier. The house was silent. Too silent. Not even the usual hum from the refrigerator downstairs. When dawn finally pushed its pale light through the curtains, Kin forced himself to get up, splash water on his face, and convince himself it had been a dream. But the memory of that cold, when she passed through him, stayed in his chest like frost that refused to melt. The next day, he avoided the hallway near the stairs. Every time he had to pass it, he felt the urge to glance over his shoulder, afraid that the small boy would be there again, bouncing soundlessly in place. By evening, the sky had darkened under a thick layer of clouds. The city's usual neon glow seemed dimmer, swallowed by the heavy air. Kin shut all the windows early, telling himself it was just to keep out the rain. That night, he tried to sleep with the lamp on. The warm pool of light on the wall felt like a shield, thin, fragile, but better than nothing. He lay still, listening to the steady tick of his alarm clock. Minutes slid by. Then, somewhere in the room, a faint sound. At first, it was just a soft scrape, like fabric brushing across the floor. Kin's eyes opened. The sound came again, slightly louder, from the corner near his desk. He sat up slowly. The lamp still glowed, the shadows sharp against the walls. But in that corner, the light didn't seem to reach as far as it should. "Kin." The whisper was right at his ear. He spun around, heart slamming against his ribs. No one. The space behind him was empty. He swallowed hard, forcing his breath to steady. And then it came again, this time from the other side. "Kin, don't look at them." The voice was low, almost gentle. But it carried something else underneath. A texture, like the sound of paper tearing slowly. Kin's skin crawled. He stood up, backing toward the door, eyes darting to every shadow in the room. The lamp flickered. Once. Twice. In that brief darkness between flickers, he saw it. A figure crouched on the floor by his desk. Long hair spilling forward, hiding the face. Hands flat on the ground as if ready to crawl. The light steadied, and it was gone. Kin's hand fumbled for the doorknob. But before he could turn it, something cold touched the back of his neck. Not a fingertip. A whole hand. The weight of it was unmistakable, each finger pressing lightly into his skin. And then the whisper returned, right against his ear. Breath cold as the inside of a grave. "He's still here. Right behind you." Kin's body locked. His eyes, wide and glassy, stared at the thin slice of hallway visible through the cracked door. Nothing moved there. But he could feel it, the presence standing just inches away, silent, waiting. By the time the sun rose, Kin's mind was already decided. He couldn't spend another night alone in that house. The whisper from last night still echoed in his ears, every syllable cold enough to sink into bone. He didn't dare tell the full story to anyone. Who would believe it? But he knew exactly who he could call. Locke, his closest friend since secondary school. Someone who never refused him. No matter how strange the request. That afternoon, Kin texted. "Can you crash at my place tonight? Just, humor me." Locke replied almost instantly. "Sure. Trouble with the landlord?" Kin hesitated. "Something like that." When evening fell, the streets outside were slick with rain, the neon signs reflecting in shimmering patches across the pavement. Locke showed up around 9 p.m. A backpack slung over his shoulder, a grin on his face. "Man, this place looks ancient," Locke said as Kin let him in. "Feels like we stepped into one of those old Hong Kong ghost films from the 80s. Kin forced a smile. "Yeah, don't say that too loud." They ordered late-night noodles from the shop down the street, ate in the small kitchen, and kept the lights on in every room. Kin didn't admit it out loud, but he felt safer with Locke there. For the first time in days, the air didn't feel as heavy. By midnight, they settled in Kin's room. Locke claimed the mattress. Kin took the floor. Rain tapped steadily against the window. The ceiling fan spun lazily above. They talked for a while, about work, about school friends they hadn't seen in years. Eventually, the conversation faded, and the quiet crept back in. It was around 2:45 a.m. when Kin stirred from half-sleep. He thought he'd heard something, a faint thud from the hallway. He opened his eyes. The door to his room was still shut. Locke was breathing steadily on the bed. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps. Not on the front door this time. On his bedroom door. Kin froze. He glanced at Locke. But his friend didn't move. Another knock followed, slightly louder, like whoever was outside had grown impatient. Kin sat up, heart hammering. "Locke," he whispered. Locke stirred, rubbing his eyes. "What time is it?" Before Kin could answer, the knocking came again. 3 precise beats. Kin's breath shook. "Someone's outside the door," he whispered. Locke frowned, listening. And then, the knob turned. Not much, just enough for the latch to click softly in the silence. Kin's skin went cold. He scrambled to grab the doorknob, holding it tight. The metal was icy under his palm, as if it had been left out in winter air. From the other side, a voice, low, almost childlike, drifted in. "Let me in. I'm cold." Locke sat up fully now, eyes wide. His bravado gone. "Who the hell?" Before he could finish, the voice shifted. Deeper. Older. Carrying a weight that didn't belong to any living thing. "You already let me in, the first night." The rain outside grew louder, battering against the glass. Kin didn't move his hand from the knob. Neither did Locke. Both of them sat in that charged silence. Until, slowly, the pressure on the other side vanished. No footsteps. No retreating sound. Just, gone. But the cold on the metal stayed. Kin didn't sleep after that night with Locke. Even when the sun came up. The air in the room still felt wrong, like something had seeped into the walls and refused to leave. Locke left in the morning, brushing the whole thing off as weird vibes, and probably a prank. Kin didn't argue. He just watched his friend disappear down the wet street, umbrella swaying in the drizzle. And felt a sudden, heavy awareness that he was truly alone again. That evening, the city was wrapped in a mist so thick that even the nearest streetlight looked distant and blurred. Kin shut every window. Locked every door. Left the lights on in every room. He tried to drown himself in meaningless tasks, boiling water for tea, folding laundry, scrolling endlessly on his phone. But by the time midnight came, the quiet had crept back in. It was the kind of quiet that didn't just happen. It waited. 1:07 a.m. Kin sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the door. No knocks. No voices. Just the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Then, without warning, a single click. The light in the hallway went out. Kin's breath caught. The air around him shifted, heavier, like a storm front moving into the room. He could feel it, something unseen stepping closer. Not from outside. Not from the hallway. But from inside the house. His limbs felt slow, as if the air had turned to water. He tried to stand. But a pressure settled on his shoulders, light at first, then firm, like two hands pushing him back down. Kin's heart pounded, every beat loud in his ears. Then it happened. A rush of cold surged up his spine, sharp and precise, like liquid ice flooding every nerve. His lungs tightened. His vision blurred at the edges. And a voice, not from the room, not from his ears, but from inside his head, whispered. "You invited me." Kin gasped, his chest refusing to fill with air. His fingers twitched uncontrollably, curling against his will. He tried to speak. But his jaw locked, teeth grinding together with a force that made his temples ache. The voice grew louder. "For nights you've watched the door. For nights you've listened. Tonight, you will open it." Kin's body moved. Not by choice. His legs carried him toward the door in slow, jerking steps. His hand reached for the knob, fingers pale, trembling, yet unstoppable. The door swung open. The hallway was dark. But at the far end, just barely visible in the haze, was a shape. A woman, her hair falling like wet silk over her face. Her white dress clinging to her as if she had just stepped out of rain. She didn't walk. She glided. Kin's eyes stayed locked on hers, though he couldn't truly see her face, only the pale oval of it. Shadowed, incomplete. The closer she came, the heavier the air grew, until it felt like the walls themselves were bending inward. When she stopped in front of him, She reached up with one hand and placed it gently over his heart. The cold that followed was absolute. It sank into his chest, his veins, his bones, until he could no longer tell where his body ended and hers began. Then the voice came again. But this time, it wasn't inside his head. It came from his own lips. "I'm home." The next night came too quickly. Kin had no sense of time anymore. He barely remembered eating, or if he'd even left the apartment that day. All he knew was that as soon as the sun went down, the air inside began to shift. The walls seemed to hum. The shadows didn't match the shapes that made them. By 2:30 a.m., the mist outside the windows was so thick it looked like the glass was sweating. Kin sat at the table, head in his hands, whispering to himself over and over, "Don't open the door, don't open the door." But then, 3 knocks. Slow. Even. Like the beating of a heart. Kin's entire body went rigid. His vision tunneled. And before he could stop himself, his legs pushed the chair back, carrying him toward the hallway. She was there. Not at the door, but inside the apartment. Her figure pale, her dress hanging loose as if waterlogged. Her hair dripped onto the floor, though there was no sound of droplets hitting wood. Kin's breath came in shallow bursts. He backed away, but the walls felt closer, the room smaller. Every time he stepped back, she stepped forward. Her face was still a blur. But her voice. "You still have my key." He didn't understand. He wanted to shout, to tell her he had nothing. But his mouth wouldn't form the words. Her hand rose, palm open, reaching toward his chest like before. Something in Kin snapped. "No." The word tore from his throat like glass breaking. He lunged backward, knocking over the table. The crash filled the room. But she didn't flinch. The cold hit him again, rolling through his body, stealing the air from his lungs. Kin stumbled, grabbing the edge of the counter. But his fingers slipped as if the surface were coated in ice. The world around him blurred, edges warping, sounds bending like they were underwater. She moved closer. Too close. Her hand passed through his shoulder, and instantly, his muscles locked. Every nerve screamed. He could feel her inside him, her weight pressing on his ribs, her breath threading through his own. Kin's vision flashed white. Images, not his, exploded in his mind. A hallway lit by old lanterns. A child's laugh. A locked door. And a woman's hands pounding against it from the inside. "Give it back," her voice echoed. "Or you will stay." Kin gasped, forcing himself to move. His arms shook violently as he grabbed for the nearest object. A heavy ceramic mug from the counter. With every ounce of strength, he hurled it at the wall mirror by the kitchen. The glass shattered. And the sound that followed was not just breaking glass. It was a scream. High, sharp, unearthly. It rang through the apartment until Kin's knees buckled. The cold vanished. The room went still. He collapsed to the floor, coughing. His vision clearing just enough to see the broken mirror lying in jagged pieces. But in one shard. She was still there. Kneeling. Staring back at him. And smiling. Kin didn't remember falling asleep. When he woke, the morning light was already spilling across the floorboards. The city outside was alive again, tram bells, distant car horns, the steady murmur of voices. For a moment, he thought, maybe it had all been a nightmare. The cold. The voice. The hand. The mirror. But when he sat up, his eyes caught the mess by the kitchen. The mirror was still shattered. Its silvered surface lying in scattered pieces across the floor. Yet, the shard he had seen her in last night was gone. Kin's chest tightened. He searched the floor, checked under the counter. Even swept his hands under the fridge. Nothing. He told himself it didn't matter. He was leaving anyway. By noon, his few belongings were stuffed into 2 suitcases. No farewell to the neighbors. No explanation to the landlord. Just the keys left on the table, and the door closed behind him for the last time. The city air felt different as he stepped outside, warmer. Though the sky was still gray. He kept his head down, moving quickly toward the tram stop, not daring to look back at the building. But in the reflection of a shop window, he caught a glimpse of the upper floors. One window, halfway open. And behind it, a curtain swaying slowly, though there was no wind. Kin forced his gaze forward and kept walking. By the time he reached his sister's flat across town, his pulse had slowed. Her place was bright, cluttered, full of life. No shadows waiting in the corners. He told himself he'd be fine here. That nothing had followed him. For a few days, it even seemed true. No footsteps in the hall. No knocks at night. No whispers. Until the 5th night. Kin had been sorting through one of his suitcases, deciding what to throw out. He reached for an old hoodie. And froze. Something small was sitting neatly on top of the folded clothes. A single piece of glass. Curved. Edges dulled, as if worn by water. Its surface, faintly silvered. And in it, just for a heartbeat, he saw her. Not blurred. Not distorted. Smiling. He dropped the shard. It hit the floor without a sound. When he bent to pick it up, it was gone. Kin didn't tell anyone. Not his sister. Not his friends. Some things, he realized, were better left unspoken. But sometimes, late at night, as he's about to fall asleep, he hears it again. The child's laughter. Soft. Playful. Coming from the hallway. He never gets up to check. Not anymore. Because he knows. Some doors, once opened, never really close. If you're still here, listening to what I just told you, and you feel like nothing is standing behind you, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the next story might find you sooner than you think. I'll be here, waiting for you to come back. But don't make me mention your name in the next story.